Welcome to another gripping legal showdown. In today's video, we're bringing you a dramatic moment from the courtroom that no one saw coming. When Kai Trump walks into the courtroom, no one expects her to go up against a seasoned judge and come out on top. But that's exactly what happens. Make sure to like and subscribe to witness the shocking twist that left everyone speechless. The courtroom was quiet as the judge entered, the soft shuffle of papers the only sound as he took his seat. Judge Arthur Kensington had been presiding over high-profile cases for over 3 decades. His reputation was well established. He was sharp, composed, and no stranger to complex legal battles. Today was no different. At least it seemed that way at first. Seated at the defense table was Kai Trump, a young woman with a reputation for fearlessness, but not much else in terms of legal experience. Kai wasn't a lawyer. She wasn't even a legal expert. But there was a calmness about her that hinted at something deeper. Her confidence radiated, and despite the odds stacked against her, there was an almost palpable tension in the air, as if everyone in the room knew this case was going to be anything but ordinary. The charges against her were serious, and the prosecution had a strong case. They had evidence. They had witnesses. They had everything they needed, it seemed. But the judge, though seasoned in his approach, couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. "Your Honor," the prosecutor began, standing up with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you're in the right. "This is a straightforward case. The defendant, Ms. Trump, has been accused of—" Kai didn't wait for him to finish. She stood up, her hand resting lightly on the table in front of her eyes never leaving the judge. The air seemed to grow heavier as her presence filled the room. Was she about to challenge him? The judge couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. This was going to be interesting. "Your Honor," Kai spoke with steady authority, her voice clear and confident, "I believe you've overlooked something significant in this case." Judge Kensington's eyes narrowed. "Overlooked something?" he echoed, the slightest smirk forming on his lips. "Ms. Trump, this case has been thoroughly reviewed, and we've seen all the evidence. How exactly do you suppose I've missed something?" For a moment there was silence. The prosecutor looked at Kai as if she'd just committed a cardinal sin. The other spectators waited, unsure of what to expect next. Was this a rookie mistake? A desperate attempt to gain sympathy? Or was something more brewing beneath the surface? Kai didn't flinch. She didn't appear intimidated by the judge's sharp gaze or the prosecutor's growing frustration. Instead, she held her ground, her composure even stronger than before. "You see, Your Honor," she continued, her voice unwavering, "the evidence you've been shown is incomplete. There's a crucial piece missing, and if you'll allow me, I'd like to present it now." A murmur spread throughout the courtroom. The judge, who had prided himself on his ability to quickly assess situations, was caught off guard. Kai Trump wasn't acting like the defendant in this case. She was acting like someone who knew exactly what she was talking about. Her words had a weight to them that was impossible to ignore. Judge Kensington leaned forward, folding his hands as he considered her request. "Present it then. But I assure you I don't appreciate delays, and I certainly don't take kindly to baseless arguments." Kai nodded and motioned for her lawyer to step forward. Her lawyer, a respected attorney with years of experience, hesitated before walking over with a file in hand. As he handed it to Kai, there was a brief flash of uncertainty in his eyes. He wasn't sure what she had in mind, but one thing was clear. She was in charge now. The judge didn't move, his gaze fixed on Kai as she carefully opened the file. She didn't speak right away. She simply flipped through the pages, allowing the tension in the room to grow. Every eye was on her, waiting. Was she truly going to pull off something unexpected? Finally, Kai spoke again. "This document," she said slowly, her voice cutting through the silence, "was deliberately excluded from the evidence list. It shows inconsistencies in the prosecution's case, something they've been hiding." There was a collective gasp in the courtroom. The judge, who had spent the last few minutes observing her with curiosity, now shifted in his seat. His interest was piqued. He motioned for her to continue. "Your Honor," Kai continued, "this document reveals that the key witness, the prosecution, has been relying on provided conflicting statements that were never made available to the defense. Without these statements, how can we trust the rest of the case?" The judge, for the first time, looked directly at the prosecutor. He was no longer smiling, no longer the calm, unflappable figure he had been moments before. There was a flicker of something, uncertainty perhaps, in his eyes. Could it be that Kai Trump had just uncovered a flaw that everyone had missed? The prosecutor, clearly rattled, scrambled to gather his thoughts. That can't be true," he stammered, but his words lacked the conviction they once had. "This evidence has already been reviewed." Kai didn't back down. "Then you'll have no problem allowing the court to examine it once more, will you?" The tension in the room was unbearable. The judge remained silent for a long moment, weighing her words carefully. He had seen countless cases unfold in front of him, but something about Kai Trump's unwavering certainty made him question everything he thought he knew about this trial. "Proceed," the judge finally said, his voice quieter, more contemplative than before. The atmosphere in the courtroom had changed. There was a quiet murmur that rippled through the room as everyone waited for what would come next. Kai Trump had just presented evidence that seemed to shift the entire case, and the judge, for the first time, appeared unsure of himself. This wasn't just a minor detail. This was a fundamental flaw in the prosecution's case that could completely unravel everything they had worked for. Judge Kensington leaned forward, his eyes scanning the document Kai had presented. His hands, which had been steady and assured, moments earlier, now trembled ever so slightly as he flipped through the pages. The room fell into an expectant silence, each person holding their breath. Was this really happening? Was this young woman, an inexperienced defendant, by all accounts, about to turn the tide of the entire trial? Kai stood confidently by, her arms crossed over her chest, watching the judge with a calmness that was almost unnerving. She wasn't trying to provoke him. She wasn't trying to gloat. She was simply waiting for the truth to be recognized. After a long, excruciating pause, the judge looked up from the papers, his expression unreadable. He glanced at the prosecutor, who seemed to have lost his usual sense of composure. "What is this?" the judge asked quietly, though his tone carried an unmistakable weight. "Why wasn't this brought to my attention before?" The prosecutor stammered, but his usual confidence had completely evaporated. I wasn't aware of this document," he admitted, his voice shaky. "It must have been overlooked, or misplaced." The judge's gaze hardened. He didn't buy the excuse. There was something deeper at play here, something that felt less like an honest mistake and more like a deliberate oversight. "Overlooked?" the judge repeated, his voice rising slightly. "This document changes everything. It casts doubt on the integrity of your entire case. You're telling me this was just misplaced? How convenient." The prosecutor's face reddened, but he couldn't respond. There was no way to explain away what had just been revealed. The courtroom was buzzing now, a palpable sense of disbelief filling the air. Was this the moment where Kai Trump, the underdog, had just completely turned the tables on everyone? Kai's eyes never left the judge. She knew this moment was critical. This wasn't just about winning a case, it was about exposing the truth. And the truth, as it seemed, was far messier than anyone had anticipated. Judge Kensington set the document down slowly, his brow furrowed in thought. His fingers tapped rhythmically on the edge of his desk as he took in the gravity of the situation. The prosecution's case, which had appeared airtight just hours before, now looked fundamentally flawed. It wasn't just the missing document. That was a problem. It was the failure to disclose it that raised questions about the entire process. The judge sighed deeply, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "We'll take a recess," he announced, his voice heavier than usual. I need time to review this new evidence." The courtroom erupted in a chorus of whispers as the judge rose and walked toward his chambers. The tension was palpable, and everyone present knew that something extraordinary had just occurred. This was no longer just about Kai defending herself. It was about exposing corruption, incompetence, or perhaps something even darker. The implications of what had just unfolded in the courtroom were far-reaching, but Kai remained where she was, standing tall at the defense table, her eyes still locked on the empty space where the judge had been just moments before. The prosecutor, who had once been so sure of his case, now looked like a man on the verge of defeat. His shoulders were slumped, his face pale. Kai's lawyer, who had been nervously watching her every move, couldn't help but speak. "What the hell just happened?" he muttered under his breath, as though trying to process what had just unfolded. Kai's lips curled into a subtle smile. She didn't answer right away. She knew the battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. But one thing was clear. She had just made her mark in the courtroom, and it wasn't going to be easy for anyone to forget it. As the judge retreated into his chambers, the defense and prosecution stood in the middle of the courtroom, unsure of what to do next. The prosecutor, though still trying to maintain some semblance of control, couldn't hide the panic in his eyes. He had been caught off guard. He had underestimated Kai Trump, and now the very foundation of his case was crumbling beneath his feet. Was this just the beginning? Was this young, inexperienced woman really going to outsmart everyone in the room, including the judge? As the seconds ticked by, one thing became clear. This case was far from over, and Kai was not backing down. The recess was brief, but it felt like an eternity. The tension in the courtroom remained thick, like the air before a storm. No one spoke, save for the hushed whispers of lawyers and spectators alike, each person keenly aware that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The judge had retreated to his chambers, leaving the courtroom in a suspended state of uncertainty. What would he decide? How would this new evidence shift the course of the trial? Kai stood at the defense table, her hands clasped behind her back, her eyes steady, unwavering. She wasn't celebrating. She knew that this was far from over, but the truth was on her side now, and that, in itself, was a victory. Her lawyer paced back and forth beside her, clearly trying to keep his own nerves in check. He was aware that Kai had done something few would dare to do: challenge the system, the very authority of the courtroom, and expose a flaw in the prosecution's case that no one had seen coming. But as the minutes stretched on, a new sense of uncertainty began to creep in. What if the judge didn't agree with her? What if he found a way to dismiss the new evidence or twist it to the prosecution's advantage? The stakes had never been higher. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Judge Kensington re-entered the courtroom, his expression unreadable. His eyes scanned the room, meeting the gaze of the prosecutor before resting on Kai. She had proven herself to be a formidable opponent, and now he would have to decide how far this could go. The silence was deafening as the judge took his seat. His gavel came down hard, breaking the stillness. "We will resume," he announced, his voice sharp, but not as confident as it had been before. "I've reviewed the new evidence, and I must say, it raises significant concerns." Kai's heart skipped a beat. There it was, the acknowledgement. The judge wasn't dismissing her out of hand. He was considering her argument. The prosecutor, however, was not so composed. His face had drained of color, and he was shifting uneasily in his seat, a man on the verge of a breakdown. "Your Honor," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "we respectfully request that the new evidence be disregarded. It's irrelevant and was introduced too late in the process." Judge Kensington didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked at Kai, as though waiting for her to speak. She did so without hesitation. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she said, her voice strong and clear, "this evidence is the key to uncovering the truth. It was intentionally hidden from the defense, and that is not just a technicality. It is a violation of my rights, and the very principles of justice. If we disregard it now, we are allowing the prosecution to play by their own rules, ignoring what's right in front of us. The judge took a moment to consider her words. He had heard countless arguments over the years, but something about Kai Trump's conviction made this one stand out. He had expected her to falter, to show weakness, but she had done the opposite. She was relentless, unapologetic, and unwavering in her pursuit of the truth. "You make a compelling argument, Ms. Trump," Judge Kensington said, his tone softer now, though still measured. "I will allow the evidence to remain in play for the time being. But be warned, this case is far from over." The prosecutor looked ready to protest, but the judge silenced him with a sharp wave of his hand. "I've made my decision," he said firmly. "We will proceed with the trial." The weight of the moment hung in the air. Kai had not only held her ground but had convinced the judge to reconsider his position. The prosecution had been dealt a blow, and Kai had taken the first significant step toward proving her innocence. It was clear now that this trial was no longer a formality. It was a battle, and Kai was not going to back down. The prosecutor, now visibly rattled, slumped back into his seat, his mind racing. What had he missed? How had he failed to account for this crucial piece of evidence? His arrogance had blinded him to the possibility that someone, anyone, could expose the flaws in his case. And now he was fighting to maintain control of a trial that was slipping from his grasp. But it wasn't just about the prosecutor. The judge, too, had been forced to confront his own assumptions. He had believed the case was straightforward, a simple trial with a predictable outcome. But Kai had shown him otherwise. She had introduced doubt, uncertainty, and an undeniable truth into the proceedings, and now even the judge was beginning to question the strength of the case against her. Kai remained calm, her eyes focused and determined. She had done it. The judge had listened. The court had taken her seriously. And now the ball was in her court. As the trial continued, the prosecutor's attempts to recover from the shocking revelation were futile. Kai Trump had not just outsmarted him. She had outsmarted the entire system, and she wasn't about to let up. The trial was now at a crossroads. Kai Trump had done what no one expected. With a single move, she had taken down the prosecution's case, piece by piece. The courtroom, which had once seemed like a battleground tilted in the prosecution's favor, now felt like a place of uncertainty. The momentum had shifted. The prosecution, which had been so confident just hours before, was now on its heels, and Kai Trump was not finished. As the days wore on, the defense presented a series of damning revelations, each one more shocking than the last. But none were more profound than the way Kai had positioned herself as the voice of reason, the voice of truth in a system that seemed to have forgotten both. Each piece of evidence she presented felt like a strategic strike, cutting deeper into the heart of the case against her. The room, once buzzing with tension, now simmered with disbelief. Kai was winning, not just the trial, but the respect of those who had underestimated her. The prosecutor, who had once enjoyed a sense of superiority, was now visibly strained. His arguments were weak, his once certain stance faltering with each passing moment. He had assumed that Kai would crumble under the pressure, that her lack of experience would be her undoing. But instead, it was his own complacency that had cost him everything. And with every objection he raised, with every counterpoint Kai presented, the judge grew more and more convinced that this was no ordinary trial. This was a battle of wills. Kai's legal genius wasn't just about uncovering technicalities or exposing the prosecution's mistakes. It was about something deeper, her ability to see through the smoke and mirrors of the system. She wasn't here to play by the rules of a broken game. She was here to challenge the very foundations of what the court had become. She wasn't simply defending herself. She was rewriting the narrative. And the turning point came when Kai's defense team presented a crucial witness, one whose testimony would irreparably damage the prosecution's case. The witness, a former employee of the company at the center of the case, stepped onto the stand, her testimony poised to change everything. As she recounted the details of her involvement, it became clear. The prosecution had been hiding the truth, the documents, the testimonies, the very structure of the case. Everything had been built on lies. The prosecutor, once so confident, could no longer hold his ground. His objections grew weaker, his arguments less coherent. The weight of his failure pressed down on him. He had misjudged Kai Trump. He had underestimated her ability to navigate the complexities of the legal system, to see beyond the surface, and expose the rot beneath. And now, in front of everyone, he was witnessing the unraveling of the case he had worked so hard to construct. Judge Kensington, who had been an observer up until now, began to take notice of the shift in power. He saw how carefully Kai had constructed her arguments, how she had methodically dismantled the prosecution's case without ever losing her composure. He had watched as the courtroom dynamics changed before his eyes. The young woman who had once seemed like an afterthought was now the center of the trial. The truth had a way of doing that. It had a way of shifting the balance of power. "You've made your point, Ms. Trump," the judge finally said, his voice grave but acknowledging. "The evidence you've presented is substantial. It cannot be ignored." The words hung in the air, and the entire room seemed to exhale collectively. The judge had confirmed it. The prosecution's case was in tatters, and it was no longer a matter of if Kai would win, but how. Kai's lawyer gave her a small nod of approval, but there was no time for celebration. This battle wasn't over yet. The prosecutor still had time to recover, still had time to fight back. But it was clear that the tide had turned. The public perception of Kai had already shifted. No longer was she the underdog. She was the one everyone was watching, and the courtroom was her stage. She had taken the fight to the prosecution, and now it was their turn to prove their case. But the truth, as they say, was on Kai's side. The law was on her side. And as the trial neared its final stages, it was only a matter of time before the truth would win out. The once powerful prosecutor now looked like a man trapped in a corner. His confidence had evaporated, replaced by the grim realization that he had been outplayed at every turn. He had expected to crush Kai Trump, to prove that she was nothing more than a footnote in a case that had already been decided. But instead, he was watching her expose every flaw in his carefully constructed narrative. It was a humbling moment, one he would never forget. And so the courtroom settled into a new, uneasy silence. The judge's words had set the stage for the final moments of the trial. It was clear that Kai had won. No matter what the final verdict would be, she had already proven her point. The world was watching, and the system had just been exposed for what it truly was, a flawed institution that could be swayed by the truth. The courtroom was filled with an eerie calm. The final day of the trial had arrived, and the weight of the moment was impossible to ignore. Kai Trump had fought tooth and nail, strategically dismantling the prosecution's case at every step, and now the end was in sight. The judge had already indicated that the evidence presented by the defense was irrefutable, leaving the prosecutor with no valid counter-arguments to make. But despite the overwhelming evidence in her favor, Kai knew that victory wasn't just about the legal case. It was about proving something much bigger. As the judge prepared to deliver his verdict, the tension in the room became almost palpable. Every person present, from the spectators to the lawyers, held their breath, waiting for the final decision that would determine not only the outcome of the trial, but the fate of the system itself. Would the judge uphold his earlier stance and rule in her favor? Or would he fold to the pressure and find some way to salvage the prosecution's shattered case? Kai stood tall, her gaze steady, unflinching. She had already won. She knew that now. The way she had outsmarted the judge, the prosecutor, and the system had already cemented her place in history. No matter the final ruling, no one could deny that she had proven herself to be a force to be reckoned with. Judge Kensington looked out over the courtroom, his gaze settling on Kai. It was clear that, despite the relentless pressure to side with the prosecution, he had come to respect her. She had not only exposed the flaws in the case, but had done so with a level of composure and legal brilliance that was impossible to ignore. His hand was forced. He had no choice but to acknowledge her victory. "Ms. Trump," Judge Kensington began, his voice carrying an unusual gravitas. "After careful consideration of the evidence presented, and in light of the arguments made by the defense, I find the prosecution's case to be lacking in credibility. The evidence you've introduced, coupled with your defense's compelling arguments, leaves me no choice but to dismiss the charges against you." A stunned silence filled the room. No one dared to speak, as if everyone was waiting for the judge to retract his statement. But he didn't. He simply looked at Kai, a quiet nod of approval, the only indication of his respect for the monumental achievement she had just pulled off. Kai's lawyer let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding, his face lighting up with disbelief. The room erupted into a mix of murmurs and quiet applause, though most of the crowd knew better than to celebrate too loudly. This was a courtroom, not a sports arena, but the victory was clear. Kai Trump had not only walked away with her freedom, but had also shaken the very foundations of the legal system that had tried to bury her. The prosecutor, however, was not so composed. His face flushed with anger and humiliation, his career seemingly shattered in one swift moment. His arrogance had been his undoing, and now he was left with nothing but the bitter taste of failure. His eyes darted around the courtroom, looking for someone, anyone, who might share in his defeat. But there was no comfort to be found. The room was not on his side. Kai turned to her defense team, a slight smile creeping onto her face. It wasn't a celebratory smile. It was a smile of quiet triumph, a recognition that the fight was far from over. The world was watching, and she had just proven to everyone that justice could still prevail, even against all odds. The courtroom emptied slowly, the spectators filing out in a state of stunned disbelief. Kai remained seated for a moment longer, her mind racing with the gravity of what had just transpired. She had done it. She had outsmarted a judge who thought he could control the narrative. She had exposed a prosecutor who believed he could manipulate the law, and she had walked out of that courtroom victorious. As Kai stood to leave, she caught the eye of a few reporters waiting outside the courthouse, their cameras poised to capture her every move. The flash of the cameras felt like a brief acknowledgement, but it was more than that. This was a turning point. The world was going to see her story, her victory, and they would know that Kai Trump was not just a name. She was a force of nature. For Kai, this moment was more than a win. It was a statement. It was proof that even in a system that often seems rigged against you, there is always a way to find the truth. And she had done just that. She walked out of the courthouse with her head held high, the weight of her legal victory settling into her bones. As the reporters swarmed around her, eager to get the first soundbite, Kai remained composed, ready to face the next chapter of her life. But one thing was certain. Kai Trump was no longer the underdog. She was the woman who had outsmarted the system, and in doing so, she had changed the game forever.